On today's episode, we talk about getting started, the Hive Flow Hive, and Swarm, the website for reporting swarms and catching swarms. So for the Fast Five, first question, what's your name?
Yeah, my name is Mateo Kaiser. I'm a beekeeper from Mountain View, California.
All right. Do you have a name for your apiary?
Not really. I guess we name our honey mostly
Oh,
after the street
yes.
we live on, and so we call it our View Street honey.
Oh, very good. Very good. And you said you're located in Northern California?
Yeah, some nice
What?
mild climate for the bees.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Welcome to Apiary Chronicles, where we dive deep into the world of beekeeping and the people who make it all happen. I'm Cal Hardage, your host and fellow bee enthusiast. And what year did you start with bees?
At this point, it's been 4 or 5 years. I got started basically right at the beginning of the pandemic.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And it's amazing that the pandemic feels like just yesterday, but when we start counting how long
Yeah.
ago it was, it's been a little while.
Now I realize, yeah.
And how many colonies do you manage?
Right now in my small suburban backyard, 2.5. But the most I've ever had, I think, was 10, 12. When I put that together with the bees I had at my college.
Oh,
Because
yes.
I had a bee garden at home and an apiary up at my college, and so we had more space and more bees there. But I've got a couple of neighbors who have bees as well, and in our small backyard, we have two hives and then a little custom nucleus colony that I built myself. That I try to run as just a 5-frame nuke, which is doable in California.
Oh, very good. Very good. So, Mateo, why bees?
Yeah, I got into the hobby pretty spontaneously. It was not something that I'd ever planned. I grew up in suburbia. Did not think that this was something that I could get into. I think as far as beekeeping was on my radar, that was sort of something that farmers did,
Oh,
and
yes.
and not something that I would do in the suburbs. And really got into it coincidentally. We can talk about that as well. What kept me with beekeeping is, I think, the same thing that a lot of people talk about, right? Is amazingly meditative. I can't think of a pet that is as low maintenance, as interesting to talk about, smells as good, produces as delicious and wonderful byproducts as honeybees do. And so I think I recommend it to most people I talk to. I think is a really nice hobby, and I'm someone who's all over the place working on 5 different things at once. And so the time when I'm most focused and most relaxed is when I'm beekeeping. And I always enjoyed doing something hands-on, and I think beekeeping is wonderfully tactile, right? You can feel it, you can taste it, you can smell it, and so it's really nice to be doing that. And it was nice to get into during the pandemic, and has remained something that I really enjoy.
You know, I never think about bees as pets. I come from a farm background. I think of livestock, but that's one great thing you bring up about them. They're not. They don't require your attention. You don't have to feed them every day. You don't have to go water them, and that's beekeeping really fits my personality for that because I get distracted and then I gotta go do this, then I'm off task. But then when I can get to the bee or the apiary, I can focus and really be in there. And
Yeah.
it's so when you've got bees flying around you, it feels like it's just you and the bees. No one else is out there.
Yeah. I will say I don't think it's the same thing as having a pet, but when I talk to people who, right, they usually have dogs and cats, and that's what they compare it to, and
Oh yeah.
it compares very favorably, I think, to right, I can travel, I can do all these things, and of course it's a little bit more like shepherding the bees. But I think
Right.
it of course takes some work and takes some learning to do, but is saying that I didn't realize that was something that you could totally get into, right? That wasn't as hard as you might think, or as obscure as you might think to get into.
I do agree. I like the analogy of a pet because that's something a lot of people can associate with,
Yeah.
and they know immediately what you're talking about. Then, yeah, they're just not quite as warm and fuzzy.
Debatable, right? I think some people like to get up close and personal. Yeah, I'd like to really get in there. But when I started out, I was definitely full suit, pretty nervous, right? Trying not to get stung at all, and I think pretty tense as well. And then now it took a long time for me to graduate to no gloves and just to just a veil. Took a while, and the more I do it, the more I enjoy getting closer to the bees that way. It gets more tactile, right? You feel the bees run over your hands, right? I think is very special.
Right. I completely agree. When you got started with bees, did you have a mentor? Did you have a bee club you went to?
Yeah, so now I'm a graduate of a master beekeeper program, but originally was a graduate of YouTube University.
Oh,
really
yes.
got started during the pandemic, and so there was not really anyone to talk to in person or work with in person. But I had a lot of time on my hands. Caught a swarm sort of spontaneously. Just happened that a neighbor who had bees was sheltering out of town. It was just right at the beginning of the pandemic when sort of everything ground to a halt. And so I grabbed that swarm, brought him home in a cardboard box, and started learning on YouTube what to do with them. I had done some kind of preliminary research, but really kind of got thrown into the deep end once this swarm appeared. And so that's what got me started. And then I had the time to watch hundreds of hours of YouTube videos and get right and kind of learn, follow the questions into what I needed to know, right? And so got started with that, and now have kind of moved towards more science-based beekeeping and getting kind of more solid footing in some of the theory here and some of the biology here, doing a master beekeeper course.
With your YouTube learning or YouTube University, what were there some channels that really stuck out that you really found really beneficial?
Yeah. Initially, I enjoyed the Flow Hive videos. They make some really nice, pleasing to watch videos and really relaxing. And I think they're very good at explaining how this is something that you can get into, right? I think when Flow Hive launched, I think there was some criticism that they made it seem too easy. But I do think they've made up for a lot of that with the really, really rigorous educational content they put out. Right? I don't know how many hundreds of videos they produced at this point, but to me it was more than just the attitude, like the idea that this was something that I as a beginner could learn, right? That there's no wrong, right? That you're not, that there's no barrier to entry that can't be surmounted. And so started there, and then got into some of the more niche beekeeping YouTubers, Cayman Reynolds, a lot of Fred Dunn, and so there's a couple of other channels. Got more and more into it, right, and getting towards some of the more niche questions, right? First, you're just trying to learn how do you do an inspection, and then after you're looking at niche different mite treatments, and that's one of the things that I really enjoy, right? Is I think for me, any good hobby, there have to be gadgets, and there have to be sort of an infinite amount of information to learn, right? You have to be able to keep going deeper,
Right.
and so I think beekeeping satisfies both those things really well.
Right, I agree because you can really go really deep with beekeeping, like you're going probably with your master's beekeeping
Yeah.
course.
There's a
What
rabbit
you
hole,
did.
and you can keep going down it, and I think that's really nice.
Yeah. When you brought that first set of bees home, did you have any equipment? Did you borrow some equipment?
Yeah, actually, lo and behold, we had a beehive sitting in the basement, and I think this is something that happens to a lot of people, or this happened to a lot of people when the Flow Hive Kickstarter came out. My dad saw that and thought, "Wow, that's cool," and bought the original Flow Hive from the Kickstarter, and then it sat in our basement for a year or two, right? Because then we kind of realized, well, it's not just honey on tap, or you actually do have to get into this, and life happens, right? You don't have time to get into it. And then when life slowed down in the pandemic, there was the time to really get into it. And so had been working at my university with a group of students who wanted to get bees on campus. And so we were doing some of the research there and trying to figure out how are we going to do this. And then right as we were going to pull the trigger in spring, we all got sent home for the pandemic. And so I was sitting at home with some preliminary knowledge, a beehive in the basement that was not being used, and then all of a sudden the swarm came along, right? And then did have the basic equipment to get started. Yeah. So I was very lucky that some of the building blocks were already in place there, even though the start was very spontaneous.
Right. So what'd you do to get started? Swarmed and you got them hived in that Flow Hive. What was your next step?
Yeah. I had done my research on watching these videos about what you do when you catch a swarm. And so I dove right in with my first mite treatment, doing an oxalic acid dribble right over the swarm where they have done a brood. And so it was a good time to do the oxalic acid dribble. And then honestly, I had my first sort of beekeeper wake up lesson when the next morning there were what to me at least seemed like a lot of dead bees up front. Right. And I think a lot of beekeepers report that like oxalic acid can be pretty tough. And so what I thought was a ton of dead bees out front. And I actually think the bees actually did end up replacing their queen. And so something didn't go quite well with the oxalic acid dribble. And so my fur immediately right off the get-go, sort of a bit of a stumble. But then, of course, a week later, seeing the beautiful starts of the comb being drawn out, it was working, and then the bees rallied, and it worked out. I think the queen did lay some eggs before dying or before vanishing or being superseded. I think at the time was not in a place to know what was exactly going on there. But so it got off to a bumpy start, but bees do well in California, and we had a nice spring. And of course, I had the time to sit there, watch the bees for hours on end, and think up questions, right? Look up answers to my questions, and probably be overly attentive to what was going on in my hive.
When did you expand beyond that one hive?
Yeah, probably a combination of when my family got used to having the bees in the backyard. I think at first there was a little bit of reluctance to have 60,000 honeybees in our backyard.
Oh yeah.
But then now they're a much beloved part of our house or our garden. But I think at the time, getting 2 colonies seemed unthinkable. But pretty quickly realized that actually 2 colonies is the way to go. At least 2 colonies, right, is the best way to start.
Right.
Because otherwise you have no comparison, right? You have no reference. And so now we always try to have at least small backyard. And so and like I said, there's a couple of other beekeepers in the neighborhood. And so I don't want to have too many bees and kind of overload our local ecosystem. But I think 2 colonies is nice. And now that I'm not home so often, and my parents are taking care of the bees there, I think, yeah, works nice to have 2 colonies and ready, you're able to move resources from one colony to the next and use them to support one another and also to compare, right, where each colony should be.
Oh yes, yeah. With having bees in your backyard in suburbia,
Yeah.
did you run into some issues? Was there any regulations you had to be aware of? Did you have any concerns from neighbors?
Yeah, to be honest, there were, I guess we didn't really tell the neighbors when we got started. It was sort of ask for forgiveness, not permission, right? I think I see this a lot from beekeepers when this gets talked about in forums, right? Like, should I tell my neighbors? And it seems to be a lot of times the consensus is if you don't think they're going to notice on their own, no need to tell them, or tell them when you bring them a glass of honey a couple months later, right? And break the news to them that way. My city had some local ordinances around placing the hive away from the property line, but other than that, there were no rules. And so place the hive in kind of a corner. We even faced it. I think this is a little trick that sometimes is useful. We originally faced the bees towards the fence. And so the entrance was facing the fence, right, which of course pushes the bees to fly up much faster.
Right.
And so we have a kind of a narrow backyard, and so we didn't want to have this sort of swath of bees flying, right, that kind of the bee highway going in and out of the hive, having that go across our whole garden. But after the first year, we actually turned the hive around because it's so much more fun to watch the bees come in and out, right?
Oh, it is.
And now that we're used to them, and now that we like having them in the garden and know that they're a nice cherished part of the garden, we haven't turned around. But originally, you tried to kind of push them into a smaller space by having them facing the fence.
Oh,
but
yes.
So far, no problems from neighbors. I think one neighbor's noticed, the other neighbor hasn't noticed, and so everyone seems happy.
Well, yeah, and that's the important part right there. If everyone's happy, it's going good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, with your first hive, you had that Flow Hive. When you expanded, did you go ahead and get another Flow Hive?
Yeah, I think we opted for like the super basic Kickstarter version.
Oh,
that's not what they have on their website now. It was like the really stripped down version, so it was actually just 3 flow frames. And so it was,
okay.
It was the bottom, right? All the hardware down below, I think maybe was even from them. I think we may have even bought that from someone else. It was a totally normal 8-frame brew box and screen bottom board. And then we had just dropped this Flow hybrid. I think they still sell a hybrid model with just 3 frames. And then on each side, 2 regular frames for honeycomb.
Oh,
right, yes. For comb honey. Or I think in the first year, we harvested those frames and just did the scratch method, right? Of just scrape it all out and then run it through a sieve. But now we harvest comb honey, right? So now we still have the Flow Hive, and so we do 3 frames of the Flow Hive honey, right? And that goes in bottles or in jars, and then the I guess 4 frames of regular comb honey that I really enjoy, at least, and I think makes a nice gift too, right? It doesn't get any purer than comb honey.
Yeah.
So I think it's a nice way to balance, but I think the rest of the boxes were actually regular 8-frame boxes from our local beekeeping store. And so no problem to expand there. Although now in California, more and more I'm realizing that single brood boxes is the way to go. The bees do quite well with a single brood box rather than double deep.
And is that what you have, double deep 8 frames?
Yeah, no, I have an 8-frame and a 10-frame, but
okay.
each running with a single deep brood box with a super on top, right? And of course the Flow Super, the Flow Super is a deep super, and the 10-frame Hive just has a regular medium super on it, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember the Flow Hive coming out on Kickstarter and the controversy that caused.
Yeah.
They did look very fascinating to me, but I've never had the opportunity to mess with one.
Yeah. You hear all sorts of things. I can say it's worked for me, right? You hear stories about it not working for people. It's worked great for me. I had I had one at my home, right, and a couple at the college apiary, where there it was actually really cool to be able to share this with more people, right? Because you make
yeah.
honey harvesting so much more exciting, right? We'd have 100 people come out to watch us harvest honey, and there it actually is this sort of fun novelty to pass pieces of crackers under the stream of honey and pass them on to people to try the honey literally straight from the hive, right?
Oh,
But
yes.
of course, some of the criticism about kind of honey on tap, I think probably merited, but I think they've definitely made up for that with the amount of educational work they've done now. And I say this as someone who was sort of drawn into the hobby by the glitzy Kickstarter video as well, right? Like I watched this video and thought, holy
Right.
crap, this is something that I could do, right? And so some people, I'm sure, watch the video, buy the Flow Hive and leave it in their basement and never use it. But ours came out of the basement and is now turned into a whole thing, right? And so I'm very grateful to some of the sort of trailblazing that they've done there.
Yeah, sometimes those new ideas or new things. I can't even think of the one with the idea hive. Maybe I
Yeah.
may have that wrong. I know Fred Dunn was talking about it, that he's getting one.
Okay.
Sometimes those things are the old established beekeepers are like, this is another fad, but sometimes it draws people in because hey, and then if you that sparks your interest and you follow it and then you're able to build your knowledge, that's not a bad deal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Flow Hive, I think, is celebrating their 10th anniversary this year. And so
Oh,
they've been
wow.
around for a while now, too. Right, I think we all remember the Kickstarter, but they've been around for quite a while now and have sold a lot of these. I don't remember the exact same number, but they've sold quite a few of these hives and built, I think, a pretty cool community of beekeepers, a lot of new beekeepers, right?
Oh, yeah.
After 10 years, or some of these are pretty seasoned beekeepers, right? But were
Right,
brought into
they
the
are.
hobby. So they sort of spawned this new community, which I think is very exciting. But of course, I see a lot of the criticism out there as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what's that? You talk to 10 beekeepers, you get 12 opinions.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I think you said you've got 2.5 hives or
Mhm.
colonies in your backyard. You've got also a nuke you manage.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to tinker, and I've been reading a little bit about managing nucleus colonies in a nucleus year round. I was curious to try that out and wasn't trying to get a whole new hive. Was catching some swarms. I usually give away the swarms that I catch to other beekeepers, right? Since I'm not trying to grow my apiary too much. But had a small swarm that was sort of raising back to health in the little hive, and wanted to try out some interesting stuff. And so I drew inspiration from a couple of different tools out there. I read some interesting stuff about hardwood, right? Using rough edge planks that have a rough texture, so that the
Oh, yeah.
honeybees put
Or
way
more
more propolis in there.
propolis?
Exactly. Yeah. So they're putting in way more propolis in the inside of the hive. So I took some old fence boards and kind of roughed them up and put them in there as the inside wall. What else? Yeah, I wanted to try building a built-in feeder, and so it's got sort of the nuke is kind of extra long and has a little feeder tank built in the back. It's got a nice little copper slanted roof, which wasn't something that I saw
Oh, yes.
on the market to buy, and so kind of made it. Right, it's sitting in my backyard, and so I wanted it to look nice. The entrance is actually a copper. I want to say it's like a irrigation gasket, like it's a little. It's an attachment for a hose. I bought at the hardware store that makes it's nice and hexagonal shape. So it's a nice little hexagon round opening for the bees to come in and out
very
of.
nice.
So it's a lot of it's aesthetic. It's got it's got some succulents growing on the wall on the side now too. So it's a whole thing. The last thing I think I built in too was, actually, I'll mention two more things because I really went down the rabbit hole with this one. There's a copper wire stretched across inside, very fine copper wire, where I was drawing from the Bee Gym. I don't know if you've seen that product, that it's been out there for a while now.
I am not familiar with that.
Yeah, when I first saw it, I almost laughed to myself. A Bee Gym? What is that supposed to be? And I had no idea if it honestly really works, but it seemed cool, and I bought one. It's a little plastic thing that goes on top of a screened bottom board, and it has some wires, and it has some little plastic flippers. And the idea is that the bees it encourages hygienic behavior in the bees, that they're able to scrape mites off of themselves. And they show a video actually where they have a video where a bee actually scrapes a mite off of itself using one of these flippers, right? So the bees are able to kind of groom themselves.
Yes.
And so I was curious if that actually worked, and thought, I can build this in, no problem. And so there's some little wires and little things basically for the bees to scratch themselves on, to basically pop mites off, and then they fall through the screen bottom board out of the hive onto a sticky board. And so that's one thing. And then the last really obscure thing that I built into this is I read an article that pseudoscorpions these tiny little insects are actually they prey on varroa mites. There was one academic article on this that they could serve as like a biological control method. And so I
Oh, yes.
did a little bit of research, dove into some communities of people who actually raise these. They look like scorpions, but they're tiny and occur basically everywhere, and try to build a way for them to sort of also live in the hive. And saw some interesting resources around. So I actually did a little cardboard stack of basically pieces of cardboard, and they live in the grooves there, right, where the bees can't access them, and the scorpions are technically able to live in there. Who knows if any do in my hive, but in the research they were talking about how old-fashioned straw skep hives that had way more crevices provided habitat space for these chelifers, is what I think the Latin name, but these pseudoscorpions, to live in these grooves and kind of coexist with the honey and actually prey on varroa mites. And so I did a little bit of reading about that, wanted to try it out, and so I have this little nucleus colony. So you probably got more than you bargained for asking about that, but that was a little test project for me there.
Those are great. Now, did you purchase some pseudo scorpions to put in there, or is the thought they'll find it on their own?
I wanted to, couldn't find any, and like I don't know, there may be laws here about not shipping them. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
I think there's also not a huge market for them, but there's an enthusiastic online community of people who catch these, and so actually I've seen them since this project. I've seen them more and more often when I garden. I've started noticing them right now that I know what to look for.
Oh yes.
But at the time, I just took my cardboard, got a bunch of leaf litter, and kind of let the leaf litter and the cardboard sit together for a couple days, with the idea that there are maybe pseudoscorpions in the leaf litter, and they maybe move into my cardboard, and when I move the cardboard back into the hive, they'll be there. Yes. I'm not vouching that this is proven or tested, but this is a little project for me.
That's very interesting. And you mentioned two things there, the pseudoscorpions and the bee gem, that I'm not familiar with. I mentioned earlier, I think before we were talking about it, how beekeeping, sometimes it's on the background, sometimes on the forefront. To be honest, I have not really focused on my apiary since the pandemic started. Really some other focuses there, and the bees have survived. And with minimal interaction with me. But also when I returned, I'm looking at catalogs and stuff. I'm just shocked by how much things have changed in the last 5 years. Just new products out there that I'd never seen before. And this bee gem is one of those that I'd never seen.
That's one of the things that I enjoy right now, and I'm sure there's plenty of gimmicks out there, but I think for a good hobby, there have to be fun gadgets to try out too. So I enjoy trying out all sorts of different things and testing new tools, right? So I've whenever I travel, I always try to look for the beekeeping store wherever I am. And so I visited beekeeping stores in Croatia and Bosnia and Bulgaria, talked to beekeepers there, found really interesting different tools that they use, and brought those home with me. And so I like to collect different beekeeping tools, little gadgets there. And there's, like you mentioned, there's all kinds of different stuff.
Oh yes, yeah. Being able to talk to some beekeepers from other countries, what's been something you've brought back home that you thought I've got to do, or it's improved your practice?
Yeah, to be honest, haven't used it yet, but is sitting on the shelf waiting to be used, is a queen isolator. And actually, I learned about this in Croatia, brought it back to the US and wrote up, and they gave me this whole instruction sheet in Croatian. And so went about translating it. Of course, a lot of the kind of technical language didn't translate well. And so did a lot of kind of hand translation there, and posted that and shared it with some beekeepers, and actually heard back from beekeepers that this is something that some people in the US are familiar with, but I had never seen it. In the US, it's usually metal, but this was a plastic box, basically made of queen excluder mesh that fits around two frames. And so what you do is you constrain the queen to just 2 frames, right? So she's laying all of her brood in just 2 frames of the hive. And the idea is, and you could also maybe, and they talked about also maybe doing this with drone frames. The idea being that the queen would then lay all of her eggs there, all the mites move into the brood on those 2 frames, and then you then release the queen again, and then you throw out the 2 frames that are now mite bombs, right? That you give them to your chickens or whatever, and get rid of those 2 frames and do some rotations like that. Variations of this technique, it turns out, are used in the US, but I came across this for the first time meeting these Croatian beekeepers who were super excited to show me this technique that I guess is very, very popular in Croatia, and is an interesting one for a treatment-free approach, right? You're sort of doing a brood break while still allowing the queen to lay. Yeah, haven't tried it yet, but is on my to-do list to give it a try, maybe this spring.
Actually, as you're describing it, I'm thinking, I've got a metal one in my box of beekeeping stuff. I heard someone talk about it. I'm assuming at the Big Bee Buzz.
You see them at the conferences sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, and I bought At least one. I just saw it the other day and thought, oh yeah, what was I doing with that?
Yeah, I've been seeing, since I learned about it, I've been seeing them more and more often. Yeah, but to me at the time, it was totally
Oh
new.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you mentioned earlier you got your start because of a swarm, and then I think you mentioned a little bit later you catch some swarms and you give them away because your apiary is the size you want for right now.
Yeah.
Do you do a lot of swarm catching?
Not as much as I'd like to. I really enjoy catching swarms. Part is how I got into the hobby, but it's also super fun to meet people. Right, I think for people who report a swarm, they've usually never had this happen to them before, right? So this is a
Oh
really
yeah.
exciting moment to talk to people about bees, right? I think most beekeepers like to talk to people about bees, and so I'm always very excited to go out and help someone pick up the bees, get them myself, and talk to them about the bees, right? And what's going on here, since usually they have no clue. And I like that it's always different, right? Like
Oh
you
yeah.
don't catch the same swarm twice. It's always a different challenge in some way, and always pretty magical and very interesting to tackle each challenge.
It is, and catching swarms will sometimes draw a crowd, like you said.
Yeah.
People are interested in it and fascinated by it, and a lot of times it's their first
Yeah.
experience with it. Do you have like a swarm kit you have in your car so you're ready to go?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if
So I've got
so,
one of
what's
those.
in it?
Yeah, so I've got one of those 5-gallon buckets, right? That sits in the trunk all spring. What's in it? Yeah, bee suit, gloves, preloaded smoker. One thing that I just started this year is making sort of prepared smoker loads,
Oh
and just
yeah.
as I use pine needles in my smoker, dry pine needles. But of course, it was a major breakthrough for me to realize that I could just kind of I could wrap them in some twine, right, and make this sort of perfect bundle. They just pop
Oh
into the
yes.
smoker and go. And I don't know why I haven't seen that before, or more often, or why I didn't come across that earlier. So I preloaded smoker, yeah, bee brush. My number one tool is new thing I got from China. Ordered it on AliExpress or something because I don't see any vendors in the US that sell this. But it is a pretty great tool. Is my extension pole swarm catching net. And so
Oh yes.
it's a canvas bag, right, on a little metal arm. And so when I pull on the string, the bag shuts and catches the bees. Put that to good use this spring.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it worked. I bought it to see if it worked or if it was bad quality and wouldn't work. And the canvas is a little flimsy, but overall works really well.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. That's
Right. So now,
interesting.
so now I'm able to reach swarms, right, 20, 30 feet up without a ladder, which is pretty sweet.
Oh, that would be, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because getting that ladder and carrying equipment up a ladder is never any fun.
Yeah.
Or maybe going up's not as bad as going down. I don't know which it is yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so it's nice to use. I think it's precarious situations has saved my butt, and so it's a nice tool to have in the arsenal. I've thought of some ways to improve it too. The one thing is that bees stick to canvas, like the bees really hold on.
Yeah.
And so honestly, something like a garbage bag would probably work even better, right? That the bees can grip as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Right. If I can just strap a garbage bag in there rather than this sort of nice looking canvas bag, might work even better. But
Yeah.
it's a nice tool, and I wish there were better versions of it available in the US. Right. So I kind of risked it and waited a month for it to arrive from China, and turned out fine. But would have liked to have a better version out there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mateo, before we move to our Beyond the Buzz
Yeah.
section, let's just talk a little bit about the future for your apiary. Where do you see it going? Are you thinking it stays just that little backyard? Would you like to grow it some? What's your plans for the future?
Yeah. I'm at a point in my life where I'm moving around a lot. I travel a lot for work, and so more and more the bees are a little bit in the care of my parents, who have been dragooned into the hobby now. So they are also now beekeepers. But right, and we spend so many hours talking about bees over dinner that they've long since become beekeepers anyways, but are now taking care of the bees quite often. Once I settle down more permanently somewhere else, there'll definitely be bees again. Now basically wherever I am, I work with beekeepers as I go. Right, so I volunteer at a local botanical garden with their bees, to do all kinds of different things to stay close to the hobby, even though I travel around quite a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, travel does make that a little bit tougher, but that's a great way.
Is not super portable.
To stay in touch
is the big thing
to
for me.
Beekeepers there or volunteer where you can.
Mm-hmm.
Mateo, let's switch gears just a little bit and go to our Beyond the Buzz, and we're going to talk about your Beeswarmed website. And first off, tell us just a little bit about it, and then we'll dive into why you created it. So
Yeah.
what is Beeswarmed?
Yeah. So Swarmed is a tool for beekeepers to hear about swarms faster, right? So I spend my spring collecting swarms and spend a lot of time refreshing Facebook, refreshing Nextdoor, waiting for someone to post about a swarm and trying to make sure I catch them fast enough, right, before they call the exterminator, before the bees move on, whatever. Trying to make sure that I'm quick enough, and is quite a drag. And I think there's so much to be improved here, especially in how associations manage swarm lists, right? I think this is one of the few places that you still see phone book directories.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so as I was testing this out, actually, I called my local I went to my local association swarm list and just called my way through the list as if I was going to report a swarm, right, to see who answered. And I'd say half the numbers nobody picked up. Of those, another half were disconnected anyways. Of the beekeepers I actually did reach, right, were either busy, too far away, no interest. And when you do reach a beekeeper, they always ask the same questions, right? And so
Oh, yeah.
what I built Swarm to do is that the public can go to a website that they're finding in the right places on the internet, right? Because I think most people, when they see a swarm, they're Googling bee swarm, what do I do, right? Bee swarm near
Oh,
me,
yeah.
swarm removal, that sort of thing. And so making sure that they're finding the website in that kind of critical moment where they're scrambling for a solution to this, at least what seems to them as like a crisis, right? When people see a bee swarm,
Right.
a lot of times there's sort of panicky element. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone to pick up a swarm and the first person who was there was the police, right? They call the police first, and the policeman says, "What am I supposed to do about this?" and leaves, right? And is wasting public resources. And of course, if you call the exterminator, they're paying money for that, and we're losing the bees. And so you want to be reaching a beekeeper, but reaching a beekeeper is not that easy. And there's no place to go to find a beekeeper reliably. And so the way the system works is they report a swarm, they answer the kind of questions that you want to know as a beekeeper. How high up are the bees? How long have they been there? Submit a photo. And then that notification gets sent out via text or email to all the nearby beekeepers who are signed up. When the first beekeeper to respond then is able to claim the swarm, get the phone number, and get the exact address, right? So you see like there's a swarm 2 miles away, but then you get the exact address, you're able to go, right? That way too, that you're not wasting your time going to a swarm that another beekeeper's already into.
Oh,
In
yeah.
some more densely populated areas that happens quite often. And so you're going there and you're able to respond really quickly. And so in a lot of areas now, at this point, I can't get swarms to my own website because other beekeepers beat me to it. And so this is working really, really quickly, which I think is what the public wants in this situation, right? They want to hear from a beekeeper quickly, who's able to help guide them through that situation. And of course, the beekeeper wants to be there quickly so they can get the bees before they move on.
Right.
So there's sort of a win-win here. And so I had this idea for how this could work and put it together into a website to see if there was any traction, if anyone would want to use this. And it's gotten a surprising amount of traction. And so now we're entering our second spring of running this, and it's grown and grown into what is now probably the largest database of beekeepers catching swarms in the U.S.
Oh, yeah. So how many swarms were caught on it last year?
Yeah, I'd say close to 1,500 around. Yeah, I'd say around 1,500. And so we're seeing swarms all across the U.S. And one of the things that I was really happy with is the number of swarms that found a beekeeper. Right, of course, there's still sometimes someone will report a swarm and the system won't find anyone.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was very happy that pretty quickly we were usually able to find a beekeeper for someone, even in all across the U.S., right? It's not that easy to quickly put together a network of beekeepers large enough. Right now we have thousands of beekeepers signed up who are able to respond wherever you are, right? And so there is help nearby, or at least within 20 miles of you, able to respond. Yeah. So I keep close eye on basically where are swarms being reported and not being claimed by a beekeeper, right? So that means that we need to find more beekeepers in that area. And then I go and I reach out to the beekeepers associations in that area, try to see if I can get some more people, right? Spread the word there and get some more people on. And that way we're able to ensure pretty good coverage pretty quickly, right? Since otherwise it would have taken a long time to build up the kind of coverage to make this a workable system.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when a person goes on there, I just pulled it up on the screen here. They enter their address, size of it, where's the swarm located, how high it is from the ground, duration, how long it's been there, and additional information. And then, include a photo, which I love the photo aspect because so often, not so often, but occasionally you go out and it's living inside the trunk of the tree.
Yep.
And that's different than a swarm out on a limb. Those are Big
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah. And of course, there it's a lot of times the beekeeper is the best person to judge that. It's hard to expect from the public that they're able to
Yes.
differentiate between a cutout and
Right.
a
Right.
swarm. Yeah, there are some ways where, it's, for example, if you select that the swarm has been there for a week or more, a little notification pops up saying, "Hey, look, this is probably a removal, not a swarm. We'll
Oh,
try to
yeah.
find your beekeeper. This may cost you, right? This is a service that beekeepers tend to charge
Right.
for, right? Basically, just saying this is not the same thing as a swarm." Since especially in the fall, we do get a fair amount of removals. And so has turned into, right, for beekeepers who do removals as part of their business, has turned into a useful resource for them as well.
Oh, yeah. I could see that.
Yeah.
Now, I think you mentioned this a little bit. Someone finds a swarm or sees a swarm, they're a little panicked. Typically, the way they react. And if they, is that the way most of your traffic's coming? They do a search, swarm in tree or bees in trees, and they're able to find your website from those search results.
I'd say about half the traffic comes from that.
Oh,
The
okay.
other half comes through partners. And so, for example, the pollinator partnership, I think the largest pollinator protection nonprofit in North America, use this on their website in their bee resources page. And so, of course, they own the domain pollinator.org, right? And so that domain is way up there in the Google results.
Oh, yeah.
And so a lot of people are finding it that way, right? And so through partners, and a lot of places through associations, because of course, if you type in bee removal in Oklahoma or near me, right, Google is giving you the geographically proximate results. And so by working with regional associations, we're able to be there where the person is actually responding and basically be there in those when they're looking for help online, making sure that they find it that way, that they're either coming to us through the website itself or through a partner organization. Some people just link the URL, or other associations who we work more closely with actually embed the form directly in their website, and so it has their logo on it.
Oh, okay.
It looks like it's built perfectly into their website, but it's actually our system running the back end and sending notifications out to their members. Some associations will choose to limit that to just their members, right? If it's reported through that association's website, it's staying with just their members, and the swarm is staying with them. But other people, like the Pollinator Partnership, they're sending that out to beekeepers across the U.S., right? So they don't have beekeeper members per se, right? But they're working to protect honeybees, and so they send out those swarm reports to anyone across the U.S. who's able to pick those up.
Oh, yeah. And just to clarify, I think you explained well, but association, if they want the swarm reports that's gone through them to only be sent to their members, they're able to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Because this was something that, and a lot of the growth of the project came from feedback from beekeepers, right? These are things that I wasn't thinking about when I built this, but then I had associations reach out. I think that feature came from the Sacramento beekeepers, who at least they claim to be the swarm capital of the U.S. with over 1,000 swarms. And so they're using the system this spring. And one of the key things there is that they were saying, well, if we're putting this on our website, there's a reputational risk for us, right? We're vouching for the beekeepers who are responding here. And so we want to be sure that we're providing a really good service to our community. And so we want it to be just our beekeepers. And so I asked for a suggested donation for that sort of thing, since at that point, you're right, that association is really benefiting from this. And of course, I need to be able to pay for this in some way. And so they're able to restrict that to just their members. And the interesting thing there too, and this is now something that I'm working on for next spring, is we're pulling in all this interesting data too, right, about where our storms being reported, the weather conditions, who's catching them, how fast, that sort of thing. And so putting together sort of an interesting dashboard for associations has been one of the things that I've been working on now over the winter when things are calmer. So now we're looking at, well, can we actually predict when a swarm is going to happen? Or can we predict where a swarm is going to happen? So I've had beekeepers who are interested in placing swarm traps based on where swarms are reported historically, right? So if you can say, well, this is sort of a hotspot in my area, in this kind of neighborhood, right, then maybe you want to put up a swarm trap there and catch the swarms before they settle in someone's chimney or before they settle in someone's attic, right? And so some interesting things to do here. There's some interesting research implications here too that I'm only just scratching the surface on, but really trying to think too about, like, there's all this interesting data we're pulling in about swarms, and how can we make that useful for beekeepers to beekeep more efficiently or more insightfully, but also use that potentially to support some honeybee research.
Oh, yes. It's a lot of interesting data being pulled in there, like you said. Now, this is free for the end user, the consumer who spotted a swarm. Is it free for the beekeeper who's saying, "Hey, yeah, I want to go get that swarm."
Yeah. So this is all powered by donations and a small online store. And so one of the goals for this was to have it be a free community service. And so this runs, so I ask for donation, right? When people report swarms, and if the swarm capture is successful, I ask for a donation, that sort of thing, but there's no actual cost to using this. And so far, I've been able to cover the cost of maintaining and improving the service.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I think for me, it was a prerequisite for there to be enough community interest and enough engagement, and for people to actually want this enough that it could sustain itself through donations. And also, I sell on the online store. There's a check, like a hive inspection checklist that the beekeepers can buy a printed copy of, and that also helps to support the project. Exactly.
Yeah. Now, this is a little bit off the topic of bees, but are you writing and maintaining the code for the website? Are you doing all that?
Yeah, actually, at this point, I have a developer who's helped out. I've had some beekeepers actually who've also reached out, and so I think the sort of open source citizen science approach is really interesting here. And so some of the first data that we got to sort of train some of the, as we were trying to see, well, can we actually predict when peak swarm season will be, for example, in a specific area?
Oh, yeah.
Using some data from iNaturalist, right? Using citizen science data to make those predictions. And so that's something that we're working on now. But basically, this is all done by volunteers, right? So when I first published this, or when I first got this out there, I had a lot of beekeepers reach out saying, "Hey, look, I have some coding skills. I think it's an interesting idea. I want to be a part of this. How can I help?" And so it's built by myself and a couple of other beekeepers who pitched in to help with their own expertise, since I do not come from a computer science background. And so I've had to teach myself a lot of the basics here. But I've had some development help along the way as well.
Oh, very good. Yes. So for beekeepers out there, they ought to go sign up for it if they're interested in getting in catching swarms. If you want to just help support the swarmed mission there, you can go donate, or you can shop at your store, which I've got it pulled up. You've got a few things here, like you said, your beekeeping logbook and colony tracker.
Yeah, and there's some affiliate links too to beekeeping products that I think work the best, and the sort of swarm-specific beekeeping products that I think work well.
Oh, yeah.
And those are some of the ways that we keep this as sort of a free community service for people, yeah.
What kind of growth have you seen? And I know we're really early in the year. I mean, the calendar just flipped, so you don't really have good data on this yet. But are you seeing a lot of interest ramp up as we get closer to spring?
Yeah, I think the closer, right, and especially once fall kind of winterizing wrapped up, right, beekeepers start to have a lot of time on their hands and start thinking about next season. And so now has been the time too where I've been working with a lot of associations, right, pitching them on how this can improve on how they have their swarm set up right now. How can this work better than a traditional swarm list? How can this be a new incentive for members to join? How can you be doing exciting things with this? And so I've been pitching this to associations, getting this set up, building the new dashboard. This all takes a lot of time. And so it's been plenty for me to do over the winter. But now I've been seeing too, as more and more interest of people as they start to think about swarm season, and now in the next couple of months, I'll be shifting towards less development work and less kind of building this, and more spreading the word, right, as swarm season starts to kind of loom in on people's minds. Exactly.
Yeah. And we kind of talked about that, supporting it, the coding, and an important question I didn't ask was, it's free for a beekeeper to sign up. Then are they just working from the website and they get a push notification? Is it an email notification? Is it an app? How are they notified there's a bee swarm that's been reported in their area?
Yeah. So I wanted to be super fast. And so I'd say about 95% of beekeepers opt to receive a text. And so you get, when a swarm is reported, you get a text message with a link in it. And when you click on that link, it opens the swarm report, and then you can actually claim that swarm. Right. And so it's 2 clicks, and then you're able to claim it. Building mobile apps is pretty time consuming and a little bit outside of my expertise. And so would take a lot more money, right? I'd have to monetize this in some way or crowdfund it in some way to really be able to do that. And so this was the most efficient and most affordable way to make a really fast swarm reporting system.
Yeah, I really like the text delivery of the notification as opposed to getting wrapped up in all the other notifications I get. And like you said, app development is a whole different beast. And
Yeah.
So I,
And I
I
will
like
say
that approach.
I try to encourage email as well, since text messages cost me money, right? Every time I send a text
Oh,
message,
right.
that costs money. Email is cheaper, and so I try to do a little incentive for beekeepers to get emails. Is that if you opt for an email, you actually see the whole swarm report in the email, right?
Oh, yeah.
You see the photo,
Yeah.
you see all the information about it in the email. With a text message, you actually have to click on that link, right? Since I'm limited for how much I can put in a text message.
Oh, yeah.
But of course,
And
text is the fastest way to notify people, and I'd say about 95% of people will choose that.
yeah, it is. Of course, with email, you could set up some alerts and stuff so that when you get an email
Yeah,
from
yeah,
this, it'd show right up on your screen.
yeah,
Yeah, because like you said, the texts are going to cost more money than your email.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, very good. Mateo, interested to see how it goes this year. I'm going to have to sign up for it. And great job this year. I'm sure it
Yeah, I
will.
hope I can get you some swarms. Yeah, like I said, working hard now too to make more of those connections, get to more associations, get the word out there. I think more and more as I gather steam, right, this sort of thing takes some time to get going. But I was already happy in the first year to get a couple thousand beekeepers join, get a good network
Oh, yeah.
going, to be able to find swarms a home quickly and as quickly as possible. And I think now I'm looking to be able to grow that as much as possible and spread the word and have out a lot of beekeepers really advocate for it, right? And have beekeepers step in and I
Oh,
think
yeah.
a lot of times the best recommendation you can get from someone is when they recommend it to a friend, right? And so
Yes.
I'm very happy how many beekeepers have brought in their friends or have brought in their association, right? And said, look, I've been using this and I think we can use this as well. And so I think that's been very helpful.
Yeah, and it's just going to improve the overall experience for everyone involved.
Yeah.
The more people you have, because it's a critical mass thing. You've got to
Yeah,
get a certain
exactly.
number of people in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm working hard to grow what we already have and make sure to be able to make this really successful for this spring.
Mateo, before we wrap up this and move to famous four, is there anything else you want to add about Swarmed?
Yeah, I think the number one thing I would say is that of course I encourage anyone to join, right? Like we talked about, it's free, and I think it's something that most beekeepers want, right? I think most beekeepers are interested in getting more bees. I think especially, right, I was just reading this year's loss survey where the University of Auburn is projecting something like a 50% loss rate. And so there are a
Oh,
lot of
wow.
beekeepers out there looking to add some more bees to their colony, right? And
Oh,
or their
yeah.
apiaries. And so this is one way to do that. And of course I encourage any associations too, right? If they've been sitting on a kind of a traditional phone directory style swarm list, that there's, I think, a really compelling way to do this. And this does not have to be super complicated, right? I think a lot of times
Oh,
in
yeah.
building this, I was thinking about what's the simplest, easiest way to do this that
Keep
makes
it
this
simple.
less of a headache, right? Less
Right.
of a headache for associations to manage, less of a headache for the public, for beekeepers. And so I think I've landed on a pretty nifty solution here. So I encourage associations to reach out and we can talk about how that works for them. And a lot of times too, I'm happy to do some sort of tailored solution. I think a lot of associations have different ideas for how they want it to work. And so being
Oh,
able
yeah.
to accommodate some of the suggestions and a lot of the ideas from associations too have now gone into the service, right? Have been sucked in and made it a better tool. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful, Mateo. It's time for us to shift gears and do our famous four questions. Same four questions we ask of all of our guests. Our first question: what is your favorite beekeeping related book or resource?
I pretty recently, or well, actually a couple months ago, read Dr. Seeley's Honeybee Democracy.
Oh,
Super interesting book. And other than Dr. Seeley, I've not seen a ton of really concrete research, and at least not presented in as compelling of a way that he does about swarms. And one of the things that I really enjoy reading about honeybee research is that some of the experiments are so intensely practical, right?
oh, yes.
They put together these really ingenious experiments that you or I could recreate in our backyards if we were inspired to do so. And so really interesting to see how he's gone about testing and his hypotheses about how swarms behave, building on research from I guess now 80 years ago. I learned a lot about the history of how we even figured out how swarms coordinate what they do and how they move through the world. And so it was really, really interesting and added a lot of background to my knowledge of swarms. And I think had this sort of superficial knowledge that every beekeeper has about catching
Oh,
swarms,
yeah.
but now came away from that book with some really, really interesting, well, interesting fun facts to share with people, but it's some interesting in-depth knowledge too of how honeybee swarms are working.
Yes, his book's a tremendous resource. Um, and if you're interested in swarms or catching swarms, I think it's a required reading.
Yeah.
It is a
Yeah.
great book. Our second question, what's your favorite tool for the apiary?
Yeah, well, I mentioned my swarm catching extension pole
Yes.
is a consistent, or well, I guess a new favorite. My 5-gallon swarm catching bucket, also what is it? An underdog in my beekeeping toolkit. Let's see. Yeah, let's see what else do I have. Well, actually, I'm a big fan, and this won't be super helpful to people because there's another tool that I picked up overseas somewhere. Is a plastic mite testing jar.
Okay.
It looks like a protein shake maker. Like it's like a
Oh, yeah.
two plastic halves that you screw together. And I've seen similar things, but this one's just made of really robust plastic, and it's for doing an alcohol wash or a sugar shake of your bees, and testing it's in clear plastic, and so you can see the mites really well. It's even got spikes on one end, and this is an interesting thing that I hadn't come across. It's got spikes on one end, so that you can test the health of your bees by actually looking at the brood comb and poking it with the spikes. So basically damaging cells in a specific area.
Oh, yeah.
And then watching how the bees deal with that and how they clean that up. And so using that as a tool, I mostly use it just for the mite checks. It's really high quality and works, I think, really solidly.
Oh, very good. A few wonderful tools there. Our third question, Matteo, our third question is, what would you tell someone just getting started?
I mean, other than that, this is totally something you can get into if you take the time and are able to take the time to learn it. This can be done on a budget. This is something that you can get into with very little space. I've seen beehives on people's balconies, and that is totally doable. I think the number one kind of concrete piece of feedback I tell people is get 2 hives right to start with. Right, I think that seems daunting, but that's my biggest regret is not starting with 2 hives, because there's so much more to be learned when you're able to compare between 2 different colonies, use resources from one to support the other. To me now that is a no-brainer, but wasn't something that I heard often enough in the beekeeping videos that I was watching when I got started. And so I think is a very useful concrete tip that I think I recommend to everyone to get started with.
Yeah. Excellent advice there. And Matteo, where can others find out more about you?
Yeah, probably the best place to go is straight to the Swarmed website. The guy who owns swarmed.org or swarmed.com wanted $10,000 for it, so the website can be found under beeswarmed.org. And so I would encourage people to check that out. There's a little bit of information about me. Mostly the important stuff is about the website and the kind of useful service that offers to beekeepers, and a little less about me.
Well, very good. Matteo, we appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.